If you have your Bibles this morning, if we'll grab them, go to Numbers chapter 13. Numbers 13. We'll be in a little bit of 13 and a little bit of 14 this morning. But as the kiddos are filing out to go to Kids Club, I have an opening illustration I want you to think about. By a show of hands, how many of you know what a Rorschach test is, or the ink blot test? You've probably heard of it. You'd probably recognize it even if you didn't know the name. So in the field of psychology, the Rorschach test is an old method designed to examine how a person thinks and how they respond to various images. And so you may have recognized it before. They show you a card, and this looks like splotches or blots of ink on it, and it's just weird shapes. So what they're doing with that, those who would use that, is they show you that image, but what they're most interested is not what the image is. There's a set of 10, but they don't care about what the image is. They care about what you think the image is. So when they show you the image and you respond, they write that down because they're wanting to know what you think you see and why. Now, whether the Rorschach test is a legitimate test or not doesn't really matter for us today, but I think there's something to that concept. Think about it. Sometimes in life, people can be faced with the very same situation, but they'll respond differently. So even though they're looking at the same thing, even though they're dealing with the same exact data, they draw different conclusions and they make different responses because they see things differently. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. As you can tell from the screen behind me, today we're going to revisit our theme for the year, which is all about stepping out in faith. And if you weren't here back in January when we started this, we were in Matthew 14. That's where the image comes from. And it's the story where the disciples are out on the lake. Do you remember? And a storm came and it was terrifying. And they look out in the storm and who do they see walking to them? It was Jesus. And Peter gets really excited and says, Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come out there. I have the faith. I will walk on the water just like you. And Jesus says, come. And what does Peter do? He goes. He's full of faith and he steps out of the boat into the raging sea and he walks out to Jesus. But then what happens? He takes his eyes off of Jesus. He notices the storm all around him and he begins to sink. But what does Jesus do? Does he just let him sink? You loser, you failure? No, Jesus saves him. He picks him up and he brings him back safely to the boat. But this is what Peter learned. This is what all of us learned in our own lives, what we're after. The point is that it's better to be in the storm with Jesus than safe in a boat without him. The boat represents what's familiar to us, what we're comfortable with, what we like. But Jesus often is out in the waves of life, out in the storms of life. And he's calling us not to the waves themselves, but to find him there. Because he is where life is if we will just trust him. When we get out of the boat and when we trust him. And then back in May, we revisited this theme for the first time and we looked at the story of Abraham from Genesis chapter 12 and how God called Abraham literally to step away from everything he had ever known and step forward in faith into an unknown future. Didn't know where he was going, didn't know what was going to happen. He just knew that God had called him and he needed to respond. And that leads us to our passage this morning in Numbers 13 and 14. We'll be looking at a time when the people of God, Abraham's descendants, were at a major turning point. They were faced with a situation that was much bigger than themselves. They were faced with a situation, we'll see in just a moment, that was terrifying to them. And so they had a choice to make. Either they could move forward in faith or they could shrink back in fear. Now, before we jump into our passage, we'll pick up in verse 25 here in just a second. But before we get to that, I want to give you some quick background information that kind of fills in the story that gets us to our point this morning. Just as God had promised Abraham, his family and his descendants grew. And they grew and they grew and they became a mighty nation. And God was with them. God was faithful to provide and to protect them and to keep them moving forward through all the ups and downs and the twists and turns of life. God was always there and God kept them moving. And even when his people became enslaved in Egypt for 400 years, God didn't forget them and God didn't abandon them. But in an over-the-top display of both his power and his faithfulness, what did God do? He rescued his people. He saved them. He redeemed them. He delivered them from slavery. Do you remember the story of the Exodus? God just didn't say, hey, get out of there, go worship me, this land that I've promised you long ago. God made it happen. God sent plagues. God worked wonders. God crushed armies. God parted seas. God provided food and water in the wilderness. God literally led them by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. So no matter what came up against the people, God kept his people moving forward to the land that he promised them. And he wasn't just leading them. He wasn't just providing for them. He wasn't just protecting them all along the way. He was teaching them. He was training them. He was shaping them how to be his people, how to know him and enjoy him and trust him and follow him. And that leads us now to our passage this morning. By the time we get to this point in the story, in Numbers chapter 13, the people are literally outside the promised land. They are on the outskirts. They are on the border. And God tells them, hey, take some spies, send them into the land to spy it out for 40 days so you can see what's there. So you can see it's just like what I told you it was, and come back with a report and then go and take the land that I have given you. But the people discovered something. The land that they spy out is both better and worse than they could have ever dreamed possible. And it all depends on how you look at it. It all depends on how you look at it, what you see, and then how you respond. So let's take a look this morning. You can follow along as I read for us. There's a big passage starting in chapter 13, verse 25. It says, at the end of the 40 days, the spies returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron, the leader of the people, and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told the people, we came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and their cities are fortified and very large. And besides that, we saw the descendants of Anak there. And then the Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev. The Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are there, and they dwell in the hill country. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea along the Jordan. But then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Then the men who had gone up with him said, no, we are not able to go up against these people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Chapter 14. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and all the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them, would that we had just died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had just died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us out into this land to now fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones are going to become prey. Wouldn't it be better for us to just go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the people of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, they tore their clothes. And they said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, this land, which we passed through to spy it out, it's an exceedingly good land. And if the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are like bread for us. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us, so do not fear them. But then all the congregation said to stone them with stones. And then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people despise me? How long will they not believe in me in spite of all the signs that I have done among them? So I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they. Okay, big passage, a lot going on here. But for our purposes this morning, what I want us to focus on, what we're going to draw out in this passage, is the difference between fear and faith. The difference between fear and faith and what it does to us. How either our fear or our faith shapes us and what we see and then how we respond and move forward. So here's the first thing I want you to write down this morning. Fear sees obstacles and faith sees opportunities. Fear sees obstacles, but faith sees opportunities. Let's look again back in chapter 13. Look at verse 27. How the spies respond when they come back from spying out of the land. Verse 27 starts very positively, doesn't it? Very encouraging. They say, look, it's a pretty good place, not going to lie. It's flowing with milk and honey, which was an expression back then to describe something that was prosperous and abundant. They say, yes, it's great, just like God said. It's flowing with milk and honey, and check out the size of this fruit. And they show them. The passage just before ours, it said when they were spying out the land, they cut off one single cluster of grapes from a branch, and it was so big and so massive, it took 2 men to carry it, right? So the point, again, is that the land is incredible. It is fertile. It is abundant. It is amazing. But have you ever talked to someone who's telling you something good, but you can tell by the sound in their voice or the look on their face that there's something else coming? Like they may have started the story well. They may have started telling you good things, but you know they're about to slip in something really negative or really bad that happened. That's what we have here, isn't it? Verse 27 starts so great. The land is amazing. Look how big the fruit is. It's everything God said it would be, but verse 28, we've got a lot of problems. We've got a lot of problems. So the people were so upset, the spies, that they were so focused on their obstacles that they couldn't see the good things in front of them anymore. And so they just start listing off all the things that are wrong, all the challenges they were going to face. And what do they say? First of all, friends, this land is not empty, which they knew beforehand, but now they're mad about it and they're scared about it. There are people who already live there, right? God is sending us to a place with people already in it, and we don't know what to do about it because they're really big and they're really scary, and their cities are really big and really scary. That's too much for us, but that's not all there is. They say, on top of that, there are even bigger people there who are even scarier. And there were legends and maybe a lot of truth to it too, that there was a race of people from Anak who were literally giants, who were massive, who were bigger than everyone else around them. So the spies are like, not only are the normal inhabitants huge, there's other people that are even bigger. But we're still not done. There's still more problems. And they just start rattling off everyone that they don't like, right? Who do they say? We got the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites. And let's not forget the Canaanites. These are all people who were violent and aggressive or idolatrous or problematic in some way or another. And so collectively, what are the spies saying? Yeah, it's fine. It's good like God said, but are you not noticing all the problems we have here? Literally, this is too big for us. This is too much for us. But they still weren't done with their negativity. Look now at verses 31 through 33. Not only do they spread a bad report to all the rest of the people, they exaggerate the report and they leave out all the good stuff. So there's no more mention of a land flowing with milk and honey. There's no more mention of really great big fruit. Now all they talk about is how impossibly large their problems are, how impossibly large their opponents are. So it's not just some of them are really big and scary. By the time they get to telling the whole group, they say everyone's big and scary and we don't stand a chance. So do you see what I'm getting at? Because of their fear, all they could see were their problems. Because of their fear, all they could see were the obstacles set against them. But what did Caleb say? Where all the other guys were scared and focused on the negative, Caleb saw the positive. Caleb saw nothing but opportunity. Look again at verse 30. Caleb is like, what are we waiting for? Are you kidding me? What are we talking about here? We saw the same things. I was there with you. I was in the land. I know what we're up against, and I know that we can do this. Now, why do you think Caleb had that opinion, that perspective? Some might say that it was just because he was young, and we all know how young men can be, right? Young men are often arrogant and think they can just take on the world and do anything that they want, or maybe they're just ignorant, they just don't know any better, and so they're reckless and they just kind of rush into trouble. But that's not what it was with Caleb, was it? Same for Joshua. It's not that they were overly excited or they were naive or they were arrogant or anything like that. What was their deal? Who did they trust in? They trusted in God. They took God seriously. They took God at his word. They believed that God was with them and for them, and that's what gave them so much confidence. So it's not that they didn't see what everyone else saw. It's not that they were blind to the obstacles before them or reckless about them. Instead, because of their faith, they saw the same problems as everyone else, but they saw them as opportunities, as an opportunity to trust God's promises, as an opportunity to witness God's power, as an opportunity to experience God's presence, as an opportunity to praise God for even more victories to come. So that's the first major difference. Where fear sees obstacles, faith sees opportunities. Here's the second thing. Fear shrinks our perspective, but faith enlarges it. Fear shrinks our perspective, but faith enlarges it. Think back through this story that we just read, or maybe even compare it to your own life. It's likely that you've experienced something like this at some point in your life because of fear. First, we have in this story fear shrinking their perspective in the sense that it led them to just fixate on their problem. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you been there? Where something goes wrong in your life and it's like that's all you can think about? And what happens if you only think about something that's wrong or something that's bad or something that's scary? Does it get better by itself? Do you feel better about it? It drags you down, doesn't it? And it shrinks your perspective to all you can see or think about is this problem. And it just gets heavier and heavier and worse because you can't see anything else. And then you start noticing all sorts of other bad things, or at least you think you do, and then it just starts to compound and snowball on you. But here's the worst way that their fear shrank their perspective. It's not just that it caused them to focus on the negative in the moment, in the present. It's that their fear caused them to forget what God had already done for them in the past. All the ways that God had shown them time and time again, generation after generation, that he was faithful, that he was good, that he was true to his word, that he was with them. And not just in the little day-to-day things, that's easy to forget, that's easy to overlook, but I'm talking about some major miracles, all the different ways that God had shown them his power and his goodness, all the times that he had made a way for them when there literally was no way, all the times that God had done the impossible. But they forgot all that. Now they're here, literally on the outside, on the outskirts of the promised land. God has provided it. It's right there for the taking, but they cannot see it and they cannot receive it because they're scared. They've forgotten all about who God is and what he's like, and all they see in this moment is their fear and their problems. That's what fear does. But faith is different. Faith expands our perspective because it gets us to look up from ourselves, look up from our problems. Faith gets us to look and think beyond what's just right in front of us. Again, faith isn't blind to our problems. Hear me. We're not turning a blind eye to what's right in front of us, but faith refuses to let that be the only thing that we consider. So instead, faith reminds us of what's true. Faith reminds us of God's goodness. Faith reminds us of God's power. Faith reminds us of God's history of faithfulness. Faith reminds us that God can do all things, and he has done so many amazing things already. And because of that, faith then opens us up to so many more options than we may realize in the moment. So many different things that God might show us if we would just look. So many different things that God would tell us if we would just listen. So many different ways that God is already at work right here, right now, if we would just trust him and follow where he leads us. That's why Caleb and Joshua were so confident, right? Look again at chapter 14, verses 8 and 9. What did they tell the people? They kept saying, don't be afraid. We have nothing to be afraid of. We have nothing to be afraid of. Why? It wasn't because their enemies weren't important. They were. It wasn't because their enemies weren't big and scary. They were, but that wasn't the point. It wasn't about how big or bad their enemies were. It was about how great their God is. Do we see the difference? Caleb and Joshua are pleading with the people. If God is really with us, and he is, and if his favor is really upon us, which it is, then do you know what that means? It means we're unstoppable. No one can defeat us because no one can defeat our God, and he is with us. So don't be afraid. Move forward and receive what God has provided. Let's trust him. Let's keep going. Let's charge the hill and see what God does. But the people couldn't see it. They're too afraid. Their fear had shrunk their perspective so much that it blinded them to God's goodness and his faithfulness and his power, and they were stuck. And that leads us to the third way that fear and faith are different. Fear is a liar, and faith is a light. Fear is a liar, and faith is a light. In other words, fear doesn't just shrink our perspective, it warps it. Do you know what I'm talking about? It takes real situations, it takes very real problems that we have, and it distorts them in our hearts and minds, so now we don't see them clearly. So now they seem bigger and worse than they really are, or we start convincing ourselves it's going to get worse before it even does. Just like we saw with the spies. They saw the problem, and how did they automatically respond? Can't do it. They're too big. We're like bugs before them, and you know what happens to bugs? They get squished. They just automatically assume, because of their fear, that we're too weak, that there's no way we could fight these people and win. But it didn't stop there. Fear led them to all sorts of wrong conclusions, didn't it? Look again at chapter 14. Did you see how they start talking? All the ideas that they now have? Not only are they too scared to receive what God has promised them, now they want to run. What do they say? They were so overwhelmed by how they thought they were outmatched, they started believing a lot of other falsehoods too. They said, it would have been better if we just died back in Egypt. They said it would have been better if we had just died out here in the desert, in the wilderness, right? Matter of fact, they came up with this great idea. This is so terrible, we should just go back to Egypt. And if Moses and Aaron won't take us, we're just going to kill them, and we'll get a new leader who will take us back to Egypt. Friends, what was waiting for them in Egypt? A warm welcome? Glad you're back? It was slavery and death. That's what God had saved them from. But now, because of their fear, they were convinced that it would be better for them to go back to that than to step forward and receive what God had for them. Fear is a liar. It's a liar. It's absolutely crazy. But as bad as all that was, the worst lie that their fear got them to believe was that God isn't good. Did you catch that? See, it's not just that they forgot all about his promises. It's not that they were just doubting his power. It's that they questioned his character. This is chapter 14. So did he just drag us out here to be slaughtered? Does God just not care about us anymore? Does he want us to die? Is he cruel? Was he just playing a game with us? He brought us out here so we can just die on the outskirts of the promise, and our women and children will be trophies for our enemies? So they rejected God, and they rebelled against him. See, their fear presented itself as a concern for safety, as a concern for survival, but in reality, it was just a cover for their lack of faith. After all they'd been through, after all God had already done for them, they still didn't trust him. And their eyes were blinded and their hearts were hardened, and they would not move forward because they believed the lies that fear was telling them. But again, faith is totally different. Now, some people get this all wrong, by the way. They think that having faith is just some sort of like dream, like it's just positive thinking, like it's like some mental cop-out, that it blinds us to reality because we just don't look at hard things and we just have our head in the clouds or buried in the sand, but that's not how faith works. Again, faith is not blind to reality. Faith is not blind to pain and suffering and hardship and challenges. Matter of fact, faith helps us see those things more clearly because it helps us see beyond those things. See, fear keeps us stuck in the dark, but faith shines God's light on our situation. God's wisdom, God's knowledge, God's plan, God's power, God's goodness, God's grace, his mercy, on and on and on. Fear keeps us stuck with ourselves and everything that we think is wrong, but faith opens us up to see the light of God, who he is and what he's doing. Do you remember Proverbs 3, 5, and 6? What does it say? Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and what? Lean not on your own understanding. Instead, in all your ways, acknowledge him, know him, trust him, honor him, follow him, and what will he do? He'll make straight your paths. He'll show you the way. Trust him, and he'll show you the way. What about Psalm 119, 105? Let's say it in the King James. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, and what? A light unto my path. God doesn't leave us on our own to figure it out or to listen to the lies in our head that fear is telling us. He shines his light. He shows the way, and he makes the way. In other words, faith helps us see things more clearly because it keeps us connected to the Lord who sees all things. And faith helps us navigate life better, even our most difficult moments, because it leads us to the God who loves us and who can make a way when there is no way. So let me ask you a question. This is a question that the Israelites back then had to come to terms with, and it's one that we have to come to terms with today as well. What are you going to listen to? Your fear or your faith? Both are speaking. Both are calling, both are demanding your attention. So which one are you going to listen to, your fear or your faith? See, your fear says that your enemies are bigger than you. But faith says, but my God is bigger still. Fear says, you've never faced anything like this before. Faith says, maybe not, but look what my God has already done. Fear says, you should run away. Faith says, no, I'm going to press on. Fear says, this is uncharted territory. Faith says, no, this is holy ground. Fear says, you are in over your head, but faith says, my God can split the waters. Fear says, you have no chance. Faith says, I have all hope. Fear says, you just can't do it. Faith says, but my God can, and he is with me. Fear will strangle you, but faith will strengthen you. Fear will enslave you, but faith will set you free. Fear will get you stuck and keep you stuck, but faith will get you moving and keep you moving. Do you see the difference? So when you're faced with a situation in life that is too big for you, that's too much, that's too scary, that's too whatever, which voice are you going to listen to? Your fear or your faith? Let me close with this today. Final thing I want you to write down. I want you to know that this story isn't about big problems. It's about a bigger God. Do we know this? Do we see this? This story isn't about big problems. It's about a bigger God. See, God's people back then, and so many of us today, had learned to measure all the wrong things. See, the point wasn't about the size of the land or the size of the grapes or the size of their opponents or the size of their city or the size of any of that. The point and the focus was the size of their faith. Would they finally let go of their fear and trust God? Would they trust him? Would they trust that he was true to his word? Would they trust that he was with them? Would they trust that he knew what he was doing and that he was going to do it? Because that's what God was up to the whole time. He was shaping his people. He was teaching them and training them to trust him today and tomorrow and the next day. Will you trust me? God was saying. In this moment, in that moment, and the next one, will you trust me? With this problem and that problem, the next one, in this situation and that situation, and the next one, will you just trust me? It's not about how big your problems is, it's about how big I am. Will you trust me? And the same is true for us today. I hope you know that there's good news today. That you and I are not the Old Testament people of Israel. We're not on the outskirts of the promised land, hoping somehow, some way we can get in, because God has already shown us once and for all that there is no one and nothing that can hold us back from entering into life with him because of Jesus Christ. What enemy could we face that Jesus hasn't already overcome? He has conquered all things. He has conquered our sin. He has conquered death itself so that we might have life everlasting with God in the promised land. Do we see that this morning? This is what God offers us, but we still have to receive it in faith, don't we? We have to turn to him and trust him. It's you and what you have done and what you are still doing. I trust you, and then move forward in obedience. Do we see that? But more than that, alongside that, even though we're not Old Testament Israel, God still calls us to things that are bigger than us, doesn't he? In our individual lives, maybe in the lives of our family. I know for sure in the life of our church, there are things on the horizon that he's starting to show us, that he's moving us towards, that he's calling us to. And I'll be honest, they're too big for me. They're too big for us. I don't know how we're going to get from here to there, but that's not the point, is it? It's not what's ahead, it's who is with us. God is still calling us to get out of the boat and to trust him, to be aware of what's going on in your life, but to hear his voice and follow him forward. Will you step out in faith and then step forward in obedience? That's what God is calling you to today. And to help you with that, I want to talk about something that we've provided for you. We've had these custom challenge coins made. And on one side, it has our church name and logo. On the other side, it has our theme logo. And they're down here in the front. But this is what I want to tell you about these. These are for anyone and everyone who wants one, if you'll step out in faith to receive it. They're provided for you, but you got to step out in faith to receive and to move forward in obedience with what God is calling you to. And I don't know what that is in your individual life or in the life of your family. God's calling us to so many things, but the bottom line is the same. Will you trust me? And if you recognize today in your heart and your life that God is calling you to something and you want to step out in faith, here in just a moment, come grab one of these. And let it be a physical reminder, not of your great faith, but of our great God. Or if God has called you to something and you've already been following him, but it's been hard, and you've gotten discouraged and you're frustrated or whatever it might be, and you're out in the waves and you're starting to sink, come grab one of these and remind yourself that God is with you and he is for you and he is greater. If God is calling you and he is, will you respond in faith and obedience?